Okay, starting now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the late Flux project meeting, March 25th, 2021. I'll go ahead and open up the doc. For meeting and agenda notes, here's the link for anyone that doesn't have it handy in the chat. And I suppose at the moment I'm doing moderation. If anybody wants to pick notes or help out with it, feel free to put your name in there. Someone could help with the attendees list too, that would be great. Okay, so we have a few topics, and please add more topics below. Oh, I have a question for Stacy.
Sure.
On the call? Oh yeah.
Yes.
First of all, sometimes you have to drop early, and so we get to your topic or your announcements earlier in the meeting. Is that the case today?
I do not have to drop early today. No.
Okay. All right. Cool. Then in that case, it may be hard, Michael, with your internet connection, but if it helps, maybe turn off the video if that. Although we love seeing your beautiful face, but it might help. I wanted to check in with you first on the weekly image update automation check-in, and just to note to everyone, it's not any kind of a time commitment as to exactly when this is going to be ready. It's just we've committed to a weekly check-in just to see where things are at, give people a sense of what they might be looking forward to.
Cool. Yeah. So the Zoom seems to be working okay just at present. It's about 1 million times better than it was earlier in the week. So let's see how we go. So I will paste a linky. So this discussion that I just put in the chat is me kind of going through outstanding features for the image automation stuff and proposals that are scattered around in a few places, and trying to draw them all together as a single proposal for V1 beta 1 of the image APIs. So let me see, it's quite long, but I've tried to be reasonably thorough. And I've put some examples in as another comment there. Yeah, so basically that is what happened last week, is I wrote that. And I think it more or less incorporates every, all the sort of favorite features and things like cross namespace source references and different kinds of source references. So in other words, I've not kind of, I've tried to include everything. So it's sort of maximalist rather than paring it all down according to any particular position I might have. So it's just kind of all there for people to comment on.
Great. I made a note of that.
Cool. So and a couple of things in it don't really depend, but are at least linked to discussions elsewhere. In particular, the kind of biggest link is to the multi-tenancy security proposal, which I will mention why briefly, because I'm sure it's come up 1 or 2 times before. There's a quite intimate relation between cross namespace references and respecting RBAC, which the security model touches on. So there's sort of a play between those two things potentially. And also impersonation, or those 3 things really. So you can't really, if you want to respect RBAC, then you can't really do it without impersonating different accounts. And yeah, so putting certain things in there means that you sort of require impersonation. anyway,
Gotcha.
that is what's happening.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. I think the only other thing, completely informally, is based on having consolidated all that, do you feel that your anticipated timeline has, or the anticipated timeline so far has increased, or do we feel like we're making steps?
I think none of it's terribly controversial. So it's in the sense of, there's broad agreement on, most people sort of think these things are basically good ideas, and then it's just working through them really. One thing that made it a good exercise to do was that it sort of, because all those things were disparate, there was a danger, or at least I thought there was a risk that they would all kind of interact quite poorly. But actually, once I jammed them all together, they, it doesn't overcomplicate things. They sort of work together okay. So it ends up being a bunch of largely independent things that you could just work your way through as a checklist, or the community and maintainers and so on could work their way through. The biggest thing is probably putting impersonation and whatever RBAC stuff for that becomes decided upon, at whatever stage we get to with the security model.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I feel like we are making good progress also on the features. We recently added the possibility to push to a different branch, and that opens up to all things around pull requests, manually approving image updates. That's already released, and it seems that it has a bug. There is a bug report on the fact that image automation controller now creates empty commits. So yeah, we need to, someone needs to get in there, test it out, and fix it. Yeah. We currently have a pull request that adds PGP signing to the image automation controller commits. And that's
there's
also
a PR for that now. Okay, wow.
Yeah.
It was only an issue yesterday.
And everything, there is an issue, it closes the issue. So it's all good. Like the PR was yesterday evening, and I don't know, I'll let you, Michael, review it. But from my point of view, it looks quite okay.
Starting cool. Simple, would you mind just summarizing the first one that we're making progress on?
So we had this feature request that came over and over. We want the image automation to go through some sort of manual approval before all these updates get on the cluster. And how we implemented that, we allow users to specify a different branch from the one that the controller uses for cloning. And let's say you use the main branch for deploying things to your cluster. Image automation controller will clone that branch. But when it detects new images, instead of pushing directly to that branch, it can push to a different branch, or you can give it a name and it will create that branch for you. Right. And from there, with, let's say, GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, or whatever, you can open a pull request so people can, click approve. I really want these images to be deployed. And that's part of the proposal. It's already implemented in V1 Alpha 1. We used V1 Alpha 1 as more of a test bench. And what Michael proposed, and I think it makes a lot of sense, is instead of jumping directly to V1 Beta 1, we will go to V1 Alpha 2 with all the breaking changes, because we rearranged stuff inside the custom resource definition to look, to be more readable. And once we figure out all these bugs that people discover while they're testing the automation, once we fix them, then we can say, okay, we waited enough, a lot of people tested it, then we can do the promotion and promote everything to V1 beta 1, including, of course, image repository and image policy, which are part of the same machinery, even if they belong to a different controller. But we are talking about image updates as a whole. So there are 3 APIs and 2 controllers.
Yeah, it's very good point Stefan was making, which is that lots of the stuff is the sort of new features are backward compatible, so they can just go in the API as it is, and then they will filter through. And there is kind of one breaking rearrangement of the API. So for that reason, we need to have another version before we have V1 beta 1. But most of the stuff can be put in one or other of those, and it's backward compatible. So that stuff is already happening, as Stefan said.
Yeah, so yeah, with every feature that we've added to the automation, of course, there are edge cases, there are issues. I don't know. Some people have reported, for example, that instead of writing only in the commit message, only the image that got updated, we write all images. Right? Okay, there's clearly something wrong there with the template or stuff like that. Maybe the test we wrote is not actually testing this issue, but
there isn't any way to get only the image that got updated, because it is always a collection of images. So I think that person may be misunderstanding what's available in the template. But I'll have a look at the bug.
Yeah, the idea is you have 2 images, only one is included in the commit. So the commit only modifies 1 image, but in the commit message, we are saying we are modifying 2 images. While in fact, if you look at the actual Git diff, it's only 1 image because the other one is never changed. So okay. I guess somewhere in the iteration that goes over the policies, takes all the policies in consideration and not only those that have an effect on files on disk. So I'm just guessing where the problem could be, right? So
I had to change that machinery quite a bit to keep track of which things it was doing. So entirely possible there's bugs in there.
Yeah, somewhere down there we iterate through all the policies instead of just those that got applied in that particular moment in time. But yeah, these are not major breakings. I mean, okay. You can still test all features and see if they work. We have an issue with the image automation controller in which it will commit to Git and it will not report that it did that because we have a conflict in terms of the custom resource. So it tries to update the custom resource. The custom resource was already updated by, let's say, customized controller who added the label to it because the Git SHA changed, and that will always happen within Flux because the image automation controller writes to Git, customized controller detects a change. So if everything is in a same Git repo, it will also tag the image automation, and you can see how it's a nonstop continuous loop over those two, and if they overlap for just a second, then the generation will be different. So we got that fixed, but not yet released. And we have to do the same thing for image policy and image repository. Also, there is the same issue is with image repository. So the image repository could pull an image, could detect it. And when it writes to the status, hey, I've detected a new image, if at that moment there is a new Git commit that changes something, it will not be able to write and tell the user, hey, I've detected a new image. It doesn't mean that, I don't know, I don't think it breaks the automation altogether, but yeah, for users, I think it's quite impactful because they no longer see what's going on inside the system. And on the next loop, even if it retries, it will never update that. For example, image automation controller not do another commit, so that information is completely lost. So we need to,
unfortunately, there's no transactions. So you sort of have to pick one or other way around. So either it could update status and then fail at the git push, or update the git push and then fail at the status potentially. But having said that, patching rather than updating is going to run into problems far less often. I think that PR needs a test to go with it, though. I still think that.
Yeah, it's a matter.
But I think Kevin's working on a test for it. So.
Okay. Yeah, so we are, to conclude, we are far from releasing a stable version of image automation. We are, I don't know, weeks, months away. I don't know, but it's still more work to do, and we need more testing on it.
We could do the rearrangement and issue a V1 Alpha 2, which would move us closer, couldn't we? I mean, I don't think there's anything stopping us. And I don't think there's going to be more comments made on that discussion that I posted earlier. So kind of may as well.
Yeah, I would review and try to merge or get the GPG signing into a state where it's mergeable, and then do it, because then we'll force the new contributor to rebase everything, and
yeah, sure.
Not a nice experience.
They came first. That's fair enough.
Yeah,
they're in the queue. Yep. So maybe next week I'll do that. Rejig the API.
Yeah, I can help out if you want. I can do the image reflector changes. That's straightforward. No.
Yeah, I mainly dealt with the sort of less with the actually rearranging the types and more with what consequences that has and control of runtime and stuff and packaging and whatever.
So from one alpha to the other, we didn't use webhooks or conventions. We just delete the old one, create the new one, and tell people, hey, you have to bump it in your Git repo and change.
When you move to this version.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's
so
easy.
We need to stage it in such way that it's included in a Flux minor release, and we have to announce everybody, hey, these are the breaking changes, and here are the mappings. You have to, get the author name and put it under author name and email, and so on. There are these small changes that everybody needs to do on each CRD. Because the built-in conversion webhook that Kubernetes has cannot deal with this sort of, you take two fields which are on the root level under spec, and these two will end up under something else. It cannot do it.
Do you feel that there are any action items that should come from the conversation that you had that should be noted somewhere, whether in these meeting notes or in the discussion or something?
Yeah, so
no, I don't think so. Oh, go ahead, Stefan.
Yeah, I think we need to write down a plan for the Flux, I don't know, 0.11 or whatever will be when we are bumping to V1 Alpha 2, and also prepare a small doc, open a discussion like we did with breaking changes back when Flux 2 was Alpha also, and explain to people, hey, this is how you can migrate. And when we have that ready, only then do the release, so people already have the docs on how to yeah.
Stefan, do you want to open an issue which just, because you sort of know the steps already, right? So just if you open an issue, like an umbrella issue, and then we can just checklist our way through it. Cool, thanks.
Yeah, we may want to bundle this with the new Flux Bootstrap or not. Bootstrap comes with major changes. It switched to Go Git providers from our own implementation. It fixes tons of edge cases, but we don't know what else could be broken. So we may want to do that or not, or delay image automation until release Bootstrap and afterwards. I think we could discuss this next week. when Bootstrap will be more ready. Yeah, so Hide posted a message today asking on the main Flux channel, asking people to test the new Bootstrap. This has been a major undertaking from him. He did a bunch of changes, good ones, and he also added a new type of Bootstrap. So currently we support Bootstrap for GitHub and GitLab, and if you want to do Bootstrap for any other Git server, you need to do it manually. Hide added a third way of doing Bootstrap, which is agnostic to your Git SaaS provider, which is called Flux Bootstrap Git, and it uses your SSH agent to clone the repo and push all things to it, and then it will prompt you with the public key that you have to set up in your Git provider, however that is done. And it also works with basic authentication, tokens, and so on. So it has all the options that Bootstrap for GitLab and GitHub have, but is no longer tied to a SaaS API anymore. It's something that will work for anything you have. That's compatible with GoGit as the implementation. So it will not work for Azure DevOps, it will work for everything else. And yeah, a lot of people have requested Bitbucket support and so on. So until we get there, we will have we'll have something from Gitea. There are so many platforms out there that Flux Bootstrap Git will work for it. So yes, please, if you have time, it doesn't take long to build the Flux CLI locally and run Flux Bootstrap Git. Or if you are a GitLab user, please test this out, because we have so many edge cases around GitLab API, and yeah, we really want to know, are we fixing everything or not?
Stefan, is that any GitLab, like gitlab.com? Does that still count, or is it just self-hosted GitLab that's problematic, or we don't know yet?
It's something around subgroups and keys that you can have. You can have keys for a personal key or a group key with subgroups. There are many things, but we had issues with gitlab.com. We had issues with GitLab on-prem. So I cannot say if it should be tested on both. If you can, please test it on both. We are going to do the same testing on our end, but the more eyes on this, the more custom GitLab server that you have, the better.
Cool.
Okay, great. Okay, if there's no more on this, I have two topics. If someone doesn't mind helping me take the notes on these ones, that would be cool. The first one is for using project boards. It would be very helpful if some of the people who are working on Flux in a project capacity, like helping with organizing things for the project and making sure that everything is kept on track, including working on some of those things. It would be good for them to be able to make changes to the project boards and just even specific project boards. And so one way we could do that is by, or I believe the only sensible way to do that is by adding them as members to the GitHub org, but they could be added to specific teams, and those teams can be given, or that team or whatever can be given access to on a per project board basis. Does that sound doable to people. I'm asking mainly because part of Flux governance is things like this. I think that it doesn't relate to one specific repo. So it would be the oversight committee, Stefan, Michael, and Hida, who need to decide on how that should work.
Sorry, Scott, can I confirm what you were saying? So
yeah,
people that work at a project level but don't currently have the ability to use project level project boards.
Correct. Yeah, and I could, okay. Yes, that exactly. And we could give people access to help with that by adding them to existing teams. For example, the community team, that might be good for some of these things. But there are other things that may actually be the best way to do it. And if that's the case, then the existing community team can vote on that, and that would be fine.
Okay.
But if you think that it would be good to just have almost like community, I don't want to say project management because no one's really a full-time project manager for Flux, but that's essentially what I'm saying is people who are helping to organize the various things that need to happen for the Flux project and community, not only community. So that's why I was thinking that it could be a little broader for various project boards than just the community team, but I don't know. What do you all think?
When you say community team, do you mean a team that's created called community, or do you mean to the community or repo?
Yeah, well, so that's the interesting thing about this. I meant the former, but that's one of the interesting things about naming. We followed protocol, well, not protocol, but we followed precedents for naming the community repo to be the overarching place where all of the artifacts are held that other repos share, and also for things that are an entry point for the wider community. It's one of the weird things about it is that people that are helping on the community, the side with engaging the community, if they're added as maintainers of the community repo, they would also, have access to change various important documents for the Flux project. So I would say it would have to be trusted people, that have already shown a sustained investment in the project and trust. But yeah, if we do that, then it would be both.
So Scott, we have currently a project for the new Flux website and all documentation, and I see that this project is at org level. It's not under, for example, the website repo.
That's right.
So what you are asking here is for other people besides Daniel to be able to add notes to such a project, right?
Correct. And the other projects there, but yes, exactly.
So if there is a permission which lets people do that, then I'm fine with having a group of people that get that permission. And indeed, maybe we could make it part of governance that the community repo team is kind of in charge of that, or particular boards, or however it works.
That makes sense to me. I think we wouldn't have to update the governance doc in order to do that. We could just open an issue, or if you want my action
and get sign off. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, we start with consensus. So if there's already consensus between the I would like to hear from Hida, but oh yeah, +1 to offload. Perfect. So if it sounds like if you agree with that, Stefan, then it sounds like there's already consensus, and I would just open an issue for transparency.
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
Yeah, and we can thumbs up it,
okay.
Up it, give it a thumbs up. Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah, we
great.
have to figure out what, I cannot tell, what exactly, what permission do you have to give a team to be able to, yeah, someone has to look into this.
To
So,
start, it's just being a member of the org. But you can scope specific permissions, so you can scope a project to just a specific team as well. So I can show you how it works, or it's
Okay.
kind of a newer GitHub feature, ish. So a lot of people, especially project maintainers, don't necessarily use it, but it's because they have their own project boards and some other tool. But it's kind of nice because it allows the community to follow along.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. We should have a project around everything major, like
Yeah.
redoing the docs and Flux website version 2 is quite something that a lot of people could contribute, but they have no idea that there is a need for that. For example, deal out with the CSS issues that, Hide is nice enough to fight them, but maybe someone that's doing that on a daily basis could come in and help us.
Excellent. So the first two people I wanted to suggest adding are Stacy and Tomo, because they are already doing this. I believe Allison as well. They're helping with these things, but they can only do so on once there are issues, not project cards, and they can't help move them into different, from to do to, work, in progress to done. And I think Kingdon's already an org member, so you should already be able to do this, I think.
Yeah, let's write down in the issue.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. Get the people there and comment, hey, I really want to do that. So we get a formal approval, a formal acknowledgement from Tomo, from Stacy, for whoever it needs to be there that they want to do that, and then we'll get it.
By default, membership comes with quite a lot of other permissions. So can we make sure that it is, I don't know whether we've changed it, membership to the org, I mean, that you can like create and delete repos and stuff.
Oh, let's definitely look into that. I don't, yeah, we'll look into it. It shouldn't
and that also
fault.
Okay. That also kind of dovetails into the suggestions Alison had that a couple of weeks ago or more, which we can think about as well. I remembered it because I was looking at the permissions in some other project and noticed that actually you get quite a lot of power just by being a member, and thought, whoa, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
So if you can check on that as well.
Actually, I'm not a org member, in spite of having write access to one repo. So apparently that's not the case.
Okay.
No, Kingdom, I added you as an external contributor to Flux and Helm operator. That's it. You're not an org member. So the org member, all the org members are listed in the maintainers team. I don't know if a non-org member can see that team, but those are all the people.
That's right.
None of you involved in the community and website, except Daniel. None of you are in there. So yeah, we need to figure out what happens when we add the people, the work, what kind of permissions it has, and if you can delete repos and stuff like that, we definitely have to sort this out before we add more people.
Yeah, let's reduce all the risk for accidents before we. Yeah. Because I really like the spirit of Alison's proposal.
I can already say that's not the case. I'm a member, but I do not have the ability to create or delete repos.
Okay.
So we can, I'll make sure that caveat's in the issue. Okay, thank you. I think that's probably it for that one, unless there's any other note there. So we still have time. The second thing is I had mentioned this before, but I'd really appreciate any conversation we need or additional thoughts around this discussion. for revising the Flux project description. I pasted it in the Zoom chat, and the issue looks kind of like your eyes can glaze over because there's some original issue description context, but the main thing is at the very top, the current proposed project description is updated there. There's been some current iteration of that was a discussion between Cornelia and I based on the initial language I proposed. And just to be clear, the idea here is that the current 1 or 2 sentence description that we have is fairly limited and doesn't really express what Flux can do now and what its intended scope is.
Can you be more specific about what it's missing?
Yes. So where we say, one moment. Okay. Our description now that we use is this description. I'll paste it in the chat and also just say it out loud in case people can't see it easily. But Flux is a tool for keeping Kubernetes clusters in sync with sources of configuration like Git repositories and automating updates to configuration when there is new code to deploy. Okay, so here is the proposed change. And I'll be specific about which pieces of this and why. Flux is a tool that watches both the actual state of your operations and the desired state declared in version source control, like Git repositories, cloud storage buckets, or Helm repos, and automatically reconciles your operations wherever they live when the actual and desired states diverge. Now,
well, that's not true.
Is it not?
So there's a problem.
What is not true?
It does not automatically reconcile your operations wherever they live. It does it in Kubernetes.
Well, the scope of Flux is, for example, in our due diligence doc does not limit where things get reconciled to being inside of Kubernetes. You can have it, for instance, our current supported controllers, most of them do that. But for example, even the image update control, even image update automation ultimately reconciles that back to Git, not your cluster, you know?
Yeah, so there are
but it's not wherever they live, is it? That is 2 places.
Okay, I agree, but like take a look at okay, I understand. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there is kind of a statement of the ambition, and I know Cornelia has specific ambitions, not even confined to Flux, about GitOps. So this is kind of a statement of what the large GitOps in the large, right? Operations wherever they are, but it's not actually what Flux does. So I'd be very careful about just adopting that very kind of expansive definition rather than just saying what Flux does, because this doesn't even mention Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is very, very central to Flux.
Absolutely.
It runs in Kubernetes and it does stuff just in Kubernetes.
So,
and writes back to Git, sure.
My question is our project scope in the due diligence doc incorrect here? In the incubation due diligence doc, where, let me just put this, this note here. So
that's very accurate, right? External clusters, live, or even live outside Kubernetes together. Yes, but there is an indirection here, right? If you have some other controller, let's say you have a controller that you place a bucket, an S3 bucket definition, and that calls out to Minio and creates in Minio that particular bucket. Minio could be outside of Kubernetes altogether, right?
Yeah.
That's the one use case. Of course, Flux will reconcile what you have in your Git repo with the cluster. Then some other controller that knows about that particular thing that Flux applied will do the offload. That particular controller will actually reconcile the bucket into Minio. It's not Flux that's doing it. So Flux is more like a vehicle, right? That gets that into Kubernetes. But from what it happens beyond that, it's in that controller responsibility, which that controller is not part of Flux. It's something else.
Got it. So that should probably be clarified then if we're going to express that.
Yeah, and you cannot do it in just a phrase. Yeah.
I think it's cool to point out that you can use it in conjunction with other bits and pieces to have effects outside Kubernetes. I think that's fair play. But otherwise, it's a bit like saying this car can drive you to a spaceport where you can take a rocket to the moon, and therefore the scope of this car is to go to the moon.
Well, if the rocket was built on a toolkit, I mean, that's the thing.
The same one that builds the car. Yeah, sure, okay. Yeah,
I mean, ultimately, the Flux well, I keep wanting to say SDK still, but I know we've moved beyond that. The Flux, the GitOps toolkit, that is at the foundation of Flux is what is recommended to be used for building additional controllers that are Flux compatible controllers. So it's a little more than just like, I walked there so my sneakers get me to the moon. It's
well, kind of. I mean, but you wouldn't use that to build something that, like the model of Flux is that you just operate within Kubernetes, and there's some other thing that is observing that stuff and does something else. Then great.
Yeah.
But the intention is not for you to build that stuff directly. You see what I mean? So the scope is actually at present limited to Kubernetes and just to interact with other things.
Okay, so
maybe
what I'm hearing is maybe the aspirational nature of this is it sounds more like a claim that's not. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah.
Okay. It's just a little too on the aspirational side, and ends up being a little misleading perhaps because of that.
Got it. Okay, cool. We'll definitely go back to the drawing board for that. The one thing is, hopefully we can find a happy path here, because just the current definition just feels more limited than what it actually does.
Very literal and not very inspiring. I agree.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. That was it for me for that, unless anyone else has other thoughts on that one. Thanks for the combo. Okay, then in that case, I'll make an action item for me to update that. Unless other people want to actually make those comments on the discussion, you're welcome to. I know you have work to do.
I can make a comment there too. Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, and I can pitch in. Okay, cool. Then in that case, I think the next agenda item is Stacy.
Sure. So I'll make this quick. I just wanted to remind everyone of the 3 upcoming talks that we have. The first one is actually going to be going live today. It's the CNCF webinar that Stefan and Lee recorded for our Flux incubating status and the road ahead. So you can click that and get that access today. I think it goes live at 12 p.m. Pacific time. And then the Flux v2 on Azure that Lee is presenting on the 5th of April is now being changed to the 6th of April because we forgot to take in the holiday into consideration. So we're going to be pushing that by a day, sorry. And then April 19th, Allison will be running through the guide on setting up notifications, alerts, and webhooks. That's it for me.
Great. Okay. If there are no questions about that, then I haven't heard it yet. So, okay. So if so, we can circle back to it, but then Alan.
Philosophical question for the team. So I've run into a use case where I have some people making changes to some resources. Hand wave a little exactly on what that means. It could be a regular Kubernetes resource. Could be a Flux customization resource, or it could be a CRD or something that ends up mapping to like user preferences or something regarding the application that is being deployed. And so I normally would have a chunk of code surfacing up something that deals with, permission checking or whatever, and then writes down to the Kubernetes API to CRUD those resources. But because I want to push everything through Git eventually, that thing needs to actually make Git commits instead, which is a little bit janky and not the way most of this works. Effectively, that means I'm using Git as a database, which is cool. That's kind of what it does. But I've already got etcd working right there, and I've got a nice pretty API slapped on top of it from the API server. And making that conversion is not super pleasant. And so philosophically, what is the most appropriate way to deal with this problem? Presumably inside of WeWork's older efforts in the past few years, there's been a lot of things around this space where people end up going and deploying an application that results in some Git commits being made and pushed. How was this approached? Is there another extra layer of database wrapped somewhere else that ends up rendering some YAML, or are you just using Git directly as the database? How are you making that application go and make sure it has the latest thing before doing the updates? The entire philosophy around that CRUD loop. How is that being handled by people?
So your colleagues, let's say, they make a change directly on the cluster?
I'm actually thinking about a use case where our customers have, so it's a multi-tenant cluster where the tenants don't have access to the cluster themselves, just like we're hosting N different applications that are all basically identical minus some config option, like their preferred subdomain or something.
Yep.
And so we go and update that infrequently. There's a Git commit to simplify the crap out of this. It's an ingress resource. And so we need to go and manipulate that, the host line in the ingress resource whenever they change their preference in some other tool. So instead of me sitting there typing out some changes, I would like to automate that end-to-end. And making sure they don't damage the wrong resources in the Git repo, fine, that's on my code to do. But dealing with the consistency problems, making sure that the current truth state is surfaced to them in the UI, those sorts of problems.
Yeah, how we currently do it is our approach. For example, if you look at the multi-tenancy example that we have in Flux 2, is that you as a, let's say, the platform owner, you delegate the responsibility of all the things that a tenant deploys to the tenant. So what you are in fact doing is you are asking the tenant, hey, do you have a Git repo where you want to store all your things that you are deploying? Okay, give me the repo, I'll add you to the cluster, I'll configure your access to the cluster. That means whatever you place in that repo cannot modify anything else but what the tenant actually owns, right?
So and that philosophy doesn't apply in this case. So the customer doesn't have a Git repo, and they don't really care that Kubernetes is even involved. They really just want their application, which we provide for them, but we provide them these 5 configuration knobs that they can tweak.
Okay.
So there could be a second Git repo, but it's also mine. And now I have to write some stuff that writes to it.
You could still use different Git repos or branches or whatever just to isolate the changes, but that's like a detail to you rather than...
So I mean, so I can have a customization in there with one of the variables, or I could have a CRD with a particular value and then make a customization out of it or whatever. Eventually, at the end of the day, I need to make a one-line commit to this repo.
So there's a library, libgitops, that I think is under weaveworks / libgitops, that gives you a kind of database view, or a sort of Kubernetes
I have not
view
seen
of
this repo.
files. It's worth having a look at that, because it doesn't sort of answer the philosophical question, but it might be, answer the how to actually craft it.
Is this currently what's being used in?
I'm not sure it's used anywhere. I just know of it because it's at weaveworks.
Okay.
We don't use it because the place that we write back to Git needs to deal with unstructured values. So there's no particular benefit to being able to sort of query stuff because it already it's already kind of on the level of dealing with files and unstructured YAML values. But if you want to deal with stuff as typed values, then and be able to query for certain bits, then it may be useful for that.
Okay, so the only place this would kind of make sense to use would be in the image updater, but it's not being used there.
Right. Yes, that is the sort of nearest fit in Flux 2. We didn't in Weave Cloud and other bits and pieces. I don't think we ever did anything that was closer to what you want to do.
But in the image updater, you were heavily using customizes setters implementation to deal with the field updates.
Right.
Okay, that code looks super janky and using some magical reflection shenanigans, I think.
Yeah.
Which one does? The setter code?
Customizes setter code is confusing me.
I am confused. Yeah, it doesn't use reflection, but it does.
No, it's not actually reflection. It just
AST
feels like
YAML.
the Java
it's very
reflection
indirect
model.
in lots of places, yeah.
Okay, I will read through this repo. Thank you very much.
So Alan, how I see it done today with no fancy tooling around it. The UI you have some fields in the UI. You take care of authentication on that UI. I'm guessing you have that sorted. You know exactly the customer ID or client ID or whatever. They change something in the UI, they click save. What it does, it takes the form, it serializes the fields as just a plain config map, a key value config map. That config map gets committed to a repo. You synchronize that repo on the cluster, and the customization or the Helm release for that particular client uses the values from that config map. So if they change, let's say, their DNS name, once they click save, if you also have a webhook set up, it will happen almost instantly on their cluster. Their ingress definition will have the new DNS name. That's, let's say, the easiest way with no fancy tooling. Just write every time the same. Load the config map in the UI, write it back.
So the UI reads from the current state in the cluster, and the save button makes a Git commit.
No. So the UI has nothing to do with the cluster. The UI, when you open the page, it goes to Git. It takes the config map from Git and it binds all the fields to the UI interface. When you click save,
I was concerned about the latency of loading that, effectively needing a Git pull or clone to get the current state. And I was considering using the Git source implementation to go and continually subscribe to the repo state to surface that up.
A faster solution will be, and this is one of the reasons we've implemented S3 as a source. So you can have something like a bucket, which is really fast for reads and also quite fast for writes. And in that bucket, you only have these config maps. And what happens, your web app, when it loads, it goes to the bucket, gets the config map from there, and saves the config back to the bucket. And then with the webhook from that bucket, it tells Flux, hey, there is a change in the bucket, go fetch everything and reconcile it.
That replaces all of your Git read writes with HTTP get puts.
Yes,
which
with
I guess
S3.
avoids any of your consistency problems by ignoring them completely and overriding them.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Bucket ops.
Yeah.
I mean,
a little bit not as
But
good.
it's appropriate sometimes.
Yeah, it's not terrible.
so you can enable versioning on buckets.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not possible. Just the default is not. Okay.
But
That's
if you are
true.
concerned
Flux
about
doesn't
speed and replication, S3 is great for that. I mean,
Mm.
all websites use some kind of S3 for caching and so on. So for static content, so it should be super fast.
And Flux, it's true that Flux doesn't require, or the source controller doesn't require versioning on buckets, right?
No, we do a checksum every time, so we know that if something changed, we do our own checksum. But it's on the latest version. We just know the previous and the current one that's being applied, right? It's up to you to enable versioning in S3, and if you want to do rollbacks and go to what Git does, it will never be like Git, but anyway.
Okay.
For things like just a config map, it works.
The alternative approach that I was considering, let me know if this is dumb. I was considering writing an admission controller that watched for the write to the config map and said, no, you can't do that. And then also made a git commit and pushed it, effectively letting you use kubectl or any other client to update the resources involved, but bind the identity of who's making the request and say, people with these roles are allowed to make git commits, but not allowed to have their stuff go through. Is that insane, but plausible?
Oh, no.
Interesting idea.
I think the main issue is with how you make sure the client ID from your web app matches, I don't know, something in Kubernetes. How do you map the two IDs?
Well, the app in front of it still has to be responsible for dealing with that problem regardless, right? It's really that web app now no longer needs to know about Git, or even the fact that Git is involved in the loop, right? It read and writes a config map only.
Yeah, the advantage of this approach is that your webhook could use the authentication already set inside your cluster, because the Git repository has a secret. There is, Git that SSH key. Maybe it has write access if you are using each image automation controller. So you already have all the things to authenticate to Git in the cluster. So you don't have to put them elsewhere in the UI. And the webhook could use some parts of the image automation controller around cloning, writing back, not changing the file itself, because we use KYAML, but yeah, you have most of the machinery of get the secret from the Git repo, clone the repo, write a config to it, and push the config. So you could reuse most of the code in a admission controller.
So is that a good idea or terrifying? Or both?
Can I step in for 1 second? I don't, not to try to answer that, but just to be a good host, I have accidentally gone 3 minutes over our time limit. So I would not want to shut down the discussion. If folks do want to continue on chatting themselves, feel free, but I think for everyone's time and just to protect everyone's time, I think I need to call it. There is one more topic, but Kingdon, can we move that to Slack temporarily and
I already started a conversation with Stacy about it, so we're going to follow up with this person.
Okay. And is there any action item that should come out of this, the philosophical / brainstorming question, Alan, do you think? Or is it kind of more just we had the conversation and
I don't believe that there is an action item. Is it worth continuing to converse, Stefan?
Yep. Yeah, let's do that. Sure.
Like, do you want to hang out here? Do you want to talk on
I
Slack?
can do it here 10 more minutes. So it's no problem.
Well, I'm going to stop the recording then, and thank you all for coming. This will be available online really soon. Thanks for the chat.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, bye.
Hi, everyone.